So how are you supposed to plan a fun and informative training when you don't even know who's going to be there? If you're anything like me, you lean pretty heavily on the old 3-step coaching method, which is basically 3 steps from the door. You think, what the fuck am I going to do tonight? And I think it's pretty understandable that we do that because it's never guaranteed who's going to be there. And you can have a full house of seniors and be in for a huge bash of Jigeiko and things like that. You could have a bunch of newbies and therefore you have to change it up accordingly. Or you could have a mixture of both. Either way, planning for that becomes really hard, right? So it's no wonder that many of us have to build the plane as we fly it when we get to the dojo. So what I want to offer you today is a coaching method that I think will really help you to overcome that problem. Making sure we can run an enjoyable training regardless of who turns up. And make sure you stay with me all the way through because I'm going to give you some examples of how to do this with the seniors, but also with the beginners as well. So this is called the STEP model, and it's a really great approach to coaching which allows us to modify or make modifications as we go to focus in on a particular coaching point. And you can even do this to the boring old minuchi 5 times, koteuchi 5 times activities that we see so often. So let me start with the letter S, right? Space. By changing the space that our students have to move around, we can focus in on how to maneuver out of the corner. So what we can do is we can put 2 people in the corner or an imaginary corner on the floor and suggest that one person has to pivot out of there without stepping over the line. So what we're doing is we're modifying the space that they're allowed to move in so that we can focus in on a coaching point, such as trying to avoid a hansoku in the shiaijo. This is absolutely something that we can do with the beginners as well. But for the sake of a really easy example that you can put into training tonight, instead of just doing your regular 5 minuchi kotai, 5 koteuchi kotai, you could create a little end zone at the end of the dojo that they have to move into after a strike before the others get there. The purpose becomes moving through more quickly, and all we have to do is make a slight modification to the space that we're using. So the next modification is time. Time refers to how much time someone has to complete an activity. For example, you could finish the 5 minuchi in under a certain amount of seconds, and you could use that to emphasize fitness. And again, your modifications around time could also include modifications around space as well. So moving into the end zone more quickly puts an emphasis on the speed and the fitness over the course of your training. For the senior people, you could make things a little bit more complex. So for example, they can't strike until the drum goes in order to build up pressure. And then when the clock starts, they have to complete X amount of strikes before the time is up. And I loved using this one with a shiai scenario. So what I would do is randomly allocate a point to someone and get the other person to have to hunt out and equalize the scoreboard before 30 seconds was up. So this made it much more realistic, and they were thinking about what waza they could use or shouldn't use with a little bit of time pressure on their minds as well. So obviously for the beginners, we don't necessarily want them to feel pressure and jeopardize the quality of what they're doing. So thinking about your coaching goal or their specific needs is key with all this sort of thing. So the next one is equipment. Now I've changed things up by using chambara swords with a lot of success in the past. And it's fun, it's safe, and both kids and big kids alike get a real kick out of it. Now I know that it's not strictly kendo, but remember that we're modifying parts of training with a specific goal in mind. So using chambara swords can help emphasize anything that's needed by the people in attendance. And that could be getting a feel for shiai or kendo sparring more generally, or a lesson in distance. This could also mean using bigger or smaller shinai during suburi so that you can start to develop strength or speed. Or it could mean having a bag of balloons in your bogu bag that you can blow up and use as targets on the kids' men when they're practicing their minuchi, for example. Once you've started on coming up with various modifications, it does get a heck of a lot easier to really align your coaching points with your modified activity. Okay, I hope you're still with me. Let's go in for the second to last one on people. So modifying the number of people that you have in an activity is another great way to keep things interesting. You're probably familiar with having people work in groups of 3, for example, but how each person has a hands-on role in that activity instead of standing around and waiting is a key change. So for example, you could place the third person as the shimpan, Yep, even a beginner. Because what is the harm? After all, we want the person to become familiar with what an ippon is and what it isn't, right? So having that third person actually contributing to what's going on in the activity really engages all three people, rather than having someone standing there and waiting for their turn. Okay, so that's the step model, but there is one more thing we can add, and that's R for rules. So this one lets you do all sorts of fun things and will normally mean that you're combining other modifications to try and get the most out of the activity. So changing the rules up could mean restricting some target areas during a jigeko or ojiwaza session. One person can only strike kote and the other person can only attack men. So before you get started, you could get them to think about 2 or 3 waza that they could use that would be really helpful. And for the person striking only kote, that might be striking fake men and then kote, or harai kote, or even hiki kote. And for the other person only striking men, they could start working on the type of footwork that will draw their opponent out so that they can do nuki waza. You could also try experimenting with making a men strike worth 2 points in your shiai practice instead of 1. And this is a way that we can change and modify the rules to encourage someone to strike more of something. And this is really helpful when we have someone becoming a bit of a one-trick pony, only striking the same thing over and over again. And of course, beginners can benefit from this sort of rule change and modification as well. For instance, you could get them to change the rules of Bokuto Keikoho. Yes, I am a massive fan of the use of Bokuto Keikoho for beginners, and seniors for that matter. You could ask them to change the rule that Bokuto Keikoho has 9 kihon and get them to create a 10th one, using the knowledge that they already have from the other kihon. This is a great way to get them engaging and thinking about how these techniques come together in a more realistic situation later on. Please let me know in the comments below if you've made any modifications in your training that you think would really help people out. Whichever element of the Step R model that you use, the idea is that we're making simple modifications to help you focus in on a particular coaching point and do this in an interesting way that suits the people that are there on the day. And the beauty of this is that you don't actually need a plan. You can make the modifications to the activities that you normally do on the fly. I've got plenty of ideas on how we can change things up in Kendo to improve learning and performance and the overall experience of our members. So make sure you check out these videos, and I'll see you in the next episode.